David Gilmour is at it again. He is remixing, remastering, updating, hitting the archives of that later Pink Floyd era, the Roger Waters era Pink Floyd, and releasing it in various formats. I'm going to cover the latest one coming right up. Over the past few years, David Gilmour has very much been revisiting the era in which he led Pink Floyd, arguably from 1987's A Momentary Lapse of Reason through 1994's The Division Bell, onward until, of course, they released The Endless River some years later in the very recent past. And he's been revisiting that era with remixes, remasters, extended versions, some unearthed things like the Live at Nebworth concert that was never released as an independent release, that type of thing. And the latest of which is this here, which is officially titled, I think, A Momentary Lapse of Reason, Remixed and Updated. And this was originally included digitally and on streaming with a huge box set of the later years that was produced 2 years ago or so, and now has had its own vinyl release independently. I have talked about this at great length on the channel before. I've actually talked about it in our Facebook group. If you haven't joined the group yet and you want to, there's a link for that below in the comment section to in the description of the video to join that. I am an unashamed completionist when it comes to Pink Floyd. I will just buy pretty much everything that they put their name on, whether or not I believe anyone else should. And this release very much falls into a completionist review release for me that I just was going to purchase because it's got Pink Floyd on the title. It's not all bad. I don't think it's a bad release by any stretch of the imagination. I just have opinions on how and why it was done. So in this video, I'm going to go over a little bit about the actual release, share my own opinions, which are, again, are my own. If anything, I want the comment section to light up. If you disagree with what I have to say, if you agree and whatnot, I'm not here to try and change your opinion on this. If you love this release or hate it, I would just like to discuss it. As far as overall packaging goes, they did a dynamite job on this all the way across the board. Very thick LP in a gatefold, and the artwork, as always, to do with Pink Floyd, is always fantastic looking. New, cleaner art direction from the original release of Momentary Lapse of Reason, while still maintaining the overall aesthetic. You would never look at this and go, "What album is that?" Like, you know that this is still Momentary Lapse of Reason. In addition to the gatefold itself and the inner sleeves and whatnot, they did include a really nice thick book. Got a lot of the art direction from the original, a lot of the CD single covers that were available at the time of release. And again, it sort of helps justify the overall cost of the package, in my opinion, because you end up with a few extras and things that you would never have in the original release, and it's not quite as much as a super deluxe box set. So I like that a great deal. As far as the actual LPs go, fantastic sounding LPs, really no complaints there. A major change from the original issue of A Momentary Lapse of Reason is the album is now on 2 LPs at 45 RPM, and I have opinions on that. I don't know that this was an album that needed that, and there's no additional the album is no longer in length than it used to be, even with the updated editions. Like, the songs themselves are the same length that they were before. There are no bonus tracks or anything like that. So in the interest of audiophile pressing, sure, I love a good 45 RPM pressing. I know there's a lot of opinions out in the community either way on it, for people who don't want to get up to flip the side. I love when you get that sonic quality, but I just don't know that this was an album that needed that. So part of me wonders if that's like just a bit of the cash grab, like, well, let's throw it on 2 LPs at 45 RPM, charge a little bit more for it, or if the intent there was just let's make this sound as good as it possibly can. So I can't really judge that because I don't know the intent, but my opinion is I lean toward it being, hey, let's throw this on 2 LPs because we can. So that's, you know, a little bit of an overview of the overall packaging and the LPs themselves. Now, of course, what matters most is the music itself. In the interest of full disclosure, and I may have mentioned this on the channel before, if not, I know for sure I've mentioned it on the podcast. Momentary Lapse of Reason is not my favorite Pink Floyd album. It's not even in my top 10 favorite Pink Floyd albums. I think there are some good things here, and it leaves a lot to be desired. Now, if you're familiar with the channel, you know I'm not just a super duper Roger Waters guy. I value all 4 members of Pink Floyd, 5 of course if you include Sid in the early years, equally for different reasons. So I'm not just the guy that said, it's not Pink Floyd because Roger's not on it. And as a matter of fact, this era of Pink Floyd is when I got into them as a kid. But taking the album into account in the entirety of their body of work, there's just a lot of things that I personally don't like on A Momentary Lapse of Reason. How that connects to this and why I'm telling you about that in this video is one of the things that I never liked about A Momentary Lapse of Reason was the 80s sounding production, very, very dated LP overall. And I didn't really have a lot of opinions on the lack of keyboard work or from Rick Wright, or a lot of the electronics, drums being used and whatnot. Just the package as a whole, I was just never really too drawn to outside of the occasional listen to Sorrow. I always preferred live versions of Learning to Fly and On the Turning Away, for that matter. So if and when I ever busted out an original pressing of A Momentary Lapse of Reason, I always found myself like just getting through it, which you should never do with an album, let alone a Pink Floyd album. So where does the album land now with this remix and updated sound? There is a lot to like here, but I personally don't think it's a game changer. I don't think it makes the album any better than it was initially. There are tracks that I can barely hear a difference on, like Learning to Fly, for example. I don't hear a huge difference between the original version we've had since 1987 and the version that appears on this record. However, there are tracks with enormous differences. I think the one that stood out the most to me is the song One Slip. Really sounds more like the full band playing together. I think they added quite a bit more keys from Rick on that track than others. Sorrow stands out to some extent. It's kind of in the middle. It's not as radical of a difference as One Slip, and it's not so similar as Learning to Fly was. There's other tracks on the record that honestly I'm just not a big enough fan of to really dig into. Dogs of War for me is still a labor to listen to, whether it's on the original or this remix and updated version. I know the song has fans, and if you're a fan of that song, that's great. It's just not one of my favorites, and this remix and updated version didn't help that at all for me. But there are other things on the record, like Yet Another Movie, that I have always been indifferent to, and I very much enjoyed listening to on this remix and updated version of the album. So I never want to tell you how to spend your money or presume that I'm telling you the authority on what you should buy and what you shouldn't, but I do like to give my opinion, and I think I've established myself as a big enough Pink Floyd fan to where I should be able to share my opinion and have some people maybe take it into consideration. And what I would say is my opinion on this overall is going to end up falling very similar to what I said about the remix and remaster of The Delicate Sound of Thunder. If you don't own A Momentary Lapse of Reason, and you're not overly familiar with the album, and you're thinking about adding it to your collection, I would tell you for sure, go make sure you pick up this version instead of seeking out an original pressing of the album, unless you're deathly opposed to the album being spread over 2 LPs and having to flip for it being at 45 RPM. If you don't mind that, and you don't already own the album, and you don't know it super well, I think this is a fantastic purchase, and the version you should probably pick up. If you are an in-depth Pink Floyd fan, you already own the original Momentary Lapse, and you're wondering if this is the version that's going to convert you to really liking the album, my experience is not so much. So again, similar to what I ended up saying about The Delicate Sound of Thunder, if you have never owned the album and you want to, and you don't know it super duper in depth, then this is hands down the way to go. If you do know it really well, maybe skip out on this, or unless you're like me and you're going to be a completionist and you're going to buy it just because it says the 2 magic words on the cover, then you're going to buy it anyways. So that is a little bit about my thoughts on this new latest release from Pink Floyd. As far as I'm aware, next year we're finally going to go a little bit backwards and get some remixes and updated versions, and we'll do this whole thing again then. As I said at the top of the video, if you haven't already, please by all means feel free to join our Facebook vinyl group. The link is in the description below. If you haven't already subscribed to the channel, if you could hit subscribe, that helps us out a great deal. If not that, at least hit the like button. And if you have opinions on anything to do with Pink Floyd or this remix and updated version specifically, leave that comment below as well. Outside of all those things, thank you so much for watching.